Welcome to the much-anticipated 89th episode of the Paperback Warrior podcast. My name is Eric, and I'm your host today for a very different show. Paperback Warrior is the premier source for reviews of vintage paperbacks, including genres like crime noir, men's action-adventure, military fiction, spy, espionage, and even the occasional sprinkling of sci-fi and horror. And here lately, we've even thrown in a bit of sleaze. But thanks for tuning in today, and I'm going to be discussing the life and work of an author that I think you should know about. That's Charles Boeckman. I'm also going to be reviewing a 1941 novel called Mercy Island by an author named Theodore Pratt. But first and foremost, those of you who missed episode 88, you've got some catching up to do. On that episode, my favorite podcast partner, that's a vegetarian that lives in Jacksonville, Tom, announced his temporary hiatus from this podcast. However, Tom really isn't gone from the show forever, but he's got some irons in the fire with his retirement and basically just beginning a new career. Plus, he's enjoying life without the stress of having to write and record shows. He's worked hard for 25 years, and I think, by God, he deserves some R&R. Now, Tom isn't out of reach, though, and he's still active, reviewing his paperbacks on the blog here at paperbackwarrior.com, and he still remains an active contributor on all of our social media platforms. I even have a couple of Tom's reviews in my inbox, just waiting for formatting and posting. Also, on episode 88, we announced that the show will slow down for a little while. Oh, excuse me. That's odd. I'm getting a phone call. Hang on. Sorry about this. Solo show, new stuff. Hang on. Paperback Warrior.
Is this the Paperback Warrior podcast?
Yeah, it is.
This is Tom from Jacksonville. Longtime listener, first-time caller.
Tom! I was just talking about you.
Small world. What a small world. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. I'm actually sitting here just recording a show. You must have been reading my brain.
Oh, my. And the listener will never see through
Never.
This bit. So let's keep rolling with this idea that this is a totally spontaneous call.
So how you been doing?
Been good, man. Retiring is a full-time job. I got 2 more weeks in my career as an FBI special agent. And so I feel like I'm working 2 different jobs right now. One, getting my cases wrapped up so I could hand them off to other agents or the prosecutor's office to get everything kind of done so no bad guys slip through the cracks. But 2, I'm also getting everything set up for this private investigator firm I'm opening. Got a website up and running, if I can plug it on the show, simoninvestigations.com. And if somebody wants to hire me, and I got my first client lined up, which is so funny from a Paperback Warrior perspective. I can't get into too many details, but a reprint publisher is engaging me to find out who holds the rights or find the heirs or who has the rights to the literary estate of the deceased author, which is something that you and I have been doing for free for years. And so the idea of me actually taking on a client to do that homework and track down a dead author's family members is just sort of funny to me. Yeah, imagine that. Yeah, that's something that we always kind of tinker and talk about, before the show and after the show, and it's funny that you're taking that on as an actual job. That's awesome. Well, I mean, I think it's going to be more of a side hustle, like just more of a labor of love, and I'd actually kind of feel weird even charging for that too much. But it's fun, keep me off the streets and give me something to do while I'm floating in the pool, gaining weight.
Yeah, that's great. Well, good for you, man.
Oh, thanks. No, I'm looking forward to it, and I do miss the show. And, man, you and I talked about this a little bit via text message, but the outpouring of love and support from our listeners when we announced that we're either changing the show or going on some kind of hiatus was just staggering. What do you think of that?
Dude, I have been blown away by the messages and just the outpouring of love. And, I'll sit sometimes at dinner, I'll be just kind of pulling up my emails and reading messages and things like that. And I'll look over my wife and I'm like, man, I feel kind of bad about kind of going, so many weeks without a show and sort of doing the hiatus in a way. But, man, it's just been great to hear such amazing things from all of our listeners. It's been awesome.
People are so nice. I mean, I listen to a bunch of podcasts and it just sort of occurred to me that I very rarely have reached out for the hosts of those podcasts to let them know how much they mean to me when I'm on my commute. And so the idea of any of them going away, I guess, would, kind of leave a little gap in my life and make things a little worse. So I guess it sort of never occurred to me that we could be providing that function in other people's lives.
Right, exactly. And it's made me think about it as well, and writing some emails or just throwing out a thanks to some of the podcasts I listen to as well. So it's I know how much labor is involved.
Yeah, God, yeah. That's part of the problem, right? And so,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, with your permission, I'd love to be able to call in or just sort of record some segments for the show until I get my feet underneath me and we can figure out what the future actually holds for kind of regular recordings and getting back to normal. I just need time right now to breathe and kind of get everything up and running so I don't go hungry living as a pensioner.
Right, exactly. And for our listeners, on episode 88, we announced that the show was going to slow down for a little while, and we've really, we've kind of spoiled you with episodes every single Monday, except for Christmas break. Again, you guys have been so supportive of our show, and rest assured that we're going to continue recording shows, but they won't appear every week, maybe once a month or maybe more if I can free up additional time. My own career has evolved into a lot of different roles within the insurance industry, but this show shakeup isn't forever, and it's not necessarily the apocalypse.
No, we'll figure something out, and until you get a co-host who's smarter and better looking, I'll be happy to fill in a little.
Awesome. All right, good. So
listen, I am the man on the road for the show, and you are the agoraphobic locked in your 10 by 10 office. But you actually went on the road. I was so shocked to see this because you went out and you actually went to a Pulp convention, right? We were texting about this, and I saw you post some stuff on Facebook. Tell me, and I guess the listeners, about that because I want to hear more about it.
Yeah, I had to do a tutorial from. I had to get a tutorial from my wife on the road to know how to pump gas. I totally forgot.
How to make eye contact with other people.
Yeah, man, it was crazy. But yeah, we took a trip down to Fort Lauderdale, which is about 4 hours south of where we're at here in Jacksonville. But I had a little bit of time on my hands, and we went down there for a 3-day weekend just to kind of get away. We had this deal that I set up with my wife. She likes ice cream, like she loves ice cream. And I love ice cream too. I love getting fatter and fatter, so I like ice cream just as much as she does. But the deal was that if she would help me at the convention work the room and sort of help me look for books that she knows I'm going to love and want to review and talk about, that I would help her each night try to scout out the best ice cream locations in northern Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And for the most part, I think it worked out pretty well. She was a really good assistant at the convention, and she really helped me out a lot. But yeah, do you want to hear about the convention a little bit?
Yeah, I'm dying to find out about it because obviously I live in Florida as well. And a few years ago, I was flirting with the idea of driving down to that convention. But a tipster told me there just wasn't a whole lot of paperbacks going on there, that it was mostly old pulp magazines, which is fine. I think those are interesting, but I'm just not a collector, and I'm more of a reader, and I don't want to spend $100 on an old issue of Black Mask or Amazing Stories to read stories that have probably been reprinted elsewhere. So I've always been a little skeptical about spending a ton of money on the actual pulp magazines themselves, although I have nothing but respect for those collectors. So I'm dying to hear from you what the paperback content was there at the show.
Yeah, fair enough. And this one is called the Pulp Adventure Con. I think it takes place every year in May. I think, and I may be wrong about this, but I think Bold Venture Press co-owner Audrey has something to do with setting this up. I think she's instrumental in this convention in some fashion, but I may be giving credit to the wrong person. But
no, it's definitely Audrey's show, and her husband, they run Bold Venture, and they've been real friends and supporters of the podcast and our blog. So I hope you were treated like a celebrity when you got there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, when we got there, I was kind of like, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but right at the door of this little convention, there's like 4 rooms in this hotel. There's an 80-year-old man at the door taking the money and giving out the tickets. I was like, well, this is appropriate.
You must have been like the youngest dude there by like 30 years, right?
Most definitely. Yeah, most definitely. But yeah, he took our money, and I walked in and I wasn't sure what to expect. And as soon as I walked in, there was a table sitting right there at the doorway of one of these rooms. And my wife and I hit that table immediately. And Tom, there were 4 large boxes just filled with vintage paperbacks. And so I'm kind of going through these and looking at the covers, and my wife's kind of helping me as well. And at the same time, I learned that the nice young ladies that were running this table, there were 2 of them, were doing this for their father, who wasn't, for whatever reason, he wasn't in attendance. But from what I can gather from them, their father really isn't into this stuff at all. But somehow he acquired them from his doctor, who I believe had passed away and apparently just gave him a bunch of boxes of paperback books. So now he has 4.
They bought a table at the convention just to like unload stuff that they had been foisted upon them by their father's doctor.
Well, here's the crazy thing. So they rent a table, right? And they, at this convention to basically just dump these books off. And there's really good stuff in the boxes. I mean, I was kind of blown away by what I was finding. But I was really concerned about the price because you have warned me in the past about these conventions and how expensive the paperbacks were. Take a guess on just the average price of one of the paperbacks in the box.
Well, I'll tell you about a convention I went to later, but my experience is that they overcharge at these things, and you get it, right? They're buying a table at a convention for like fans and collectors. It doesn't make sense for them to bring their like $5 for $1 books there the way you'd see sitting outside on the sidewalk outside a bookstore. So my guess is that they're charging probably $5 to $10 a paperback. That's what I was seeing at the convention I went to, and some of them were worth it, but a lot of them weren't.
Well, surprisingly, as I was going through this, I started getting a little bit panicked because I wasn't sure what the total was going to be. So I'm starting to stack up books. And I ask, and she says, well, it should be marked on the box there somewhere. She goes, just look around on the box. Tom, the box had some marker written on there, 8 books for $10.
My God, is it even worth their time to get a table at a convention?
I don't know. I'm just blown away by, I don't want to say the ignorance or the uneducation, but just the lackadaisical approach of just throwing out boxes on a table and just not making any money. But do you want?
I'd have given him $30 and said, just carry it all to my car. I'll sort it out later.
I know, and it's funny because I had to basically fill up one of the boxes completely with my own purchases, and I had to go out of the convention. We had to walk to my car, put them in the trunk, and then go back into the 80-year-old man, show our ticket to get back in.
Yeah, I'm curious if it's like 1970s, like able team stuff, or if we're talking like 1950s gold medals and things. Right,
yeah. So, and you can correct me if I get some of these authors wrong because you're better with the pseudonyms and things like that. But so I got 3 Michael Avallone novels, The Voodoo Murders, Violence in Velvet, and The February Doll Murders, 3 books in his Ed Noon series.
You should definitely check those out. You should read those. Half of them are straight up mysteries, kind of like Mickey Spillane, Shel Scott types. But at one point, he solves a mystery for the president of the U.S. and becomes the president's personal spy operative. So the president becomes like his client to do international spy missions. So half of them are spy books, half of them are mystery novels, or maybe it's not half and half. But you can read the back and figure out which one it is. But they're a lot of fun. He's such a good writer.
Good. I'm looking forward to that. I picked up Cornell Woolrich's Nightmare, 2 books from your guy Bruno Fisher, Knee Deep in Death and House of Flesh.
Flesh was his big hit. I think that was his bestseller ever.
Ira Levin's A Kiss Before Dying.
Yeah, I have that. I've been meaning to read that, so you and I can race to the finish on that. I've heard good things about it.
Good. Our buddy Dan Marlowe, Dan Marlowe's Route of the Red Gold, which is a Fawcett paperback. Roy Huggins' 77 Sunset Strip, which I think is based off the TV show. Gardner F. Fox's disaster book, Hurricane, which looks fantastic. I get an Edward Aarons novel, which is kind of unusual. It's a comedy. It's called But Not For Me. And really the only reason I picked it up is just because I collect his stuff, and it has the naming of Edward Rons on the cover. Here's one I'm not familiar with. Richard Hallis, a novel called You Play Black and the Red Comes Up.
Yeah, he wrote was it one of those Black Lizard books from like the 70s?
No, this was an original, and I think it was either graphic mystery or it was Adele.
Okay, yeah, no, I think that one got reprinted with, I don't like those covers, but remember all those Jim Thompson books that Black Lizard was publishing with those pastel covers? I think that was one of those ones that got reprinted, and it's supposed to be good.
Okay, good. I got Jonathan Latimer's The Fifth Grave, which got some great artwork.
Yeah, he's amazing. I love that one book that by him, which I can't recall the name of, that he wrote. I think The Fifth Grave might have been a series before the one that I enjoyed, because this is a spontaneous bit we're doing, I don't have any of my notes handy. But yeah, he's great. He's such a good writer.
I'm not sure if you saw or read Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but it was by an author named Jack Finney. And I found a prison paperback that he wrote called The House of Numbers, which looks great. I picked up 13 West Street by Lee Brackett, Richard Prather's Dagger of Flesh, which doesn't look like it's a Shel Scott novel. I think it's a standalone. Sing Out Sweet Suicide by a guy named John Robert. Let's see, what was this? What a Body by Alan Green. The Way Some People Die by John Ross Macdonald. Of course, that's an Archer novel, I believe. Into the Tiger, which is a short story collection by John D. MacDonald. I didn't realize he had that book for. So
I've seen that one. He's got a couple short story collections. Two of them called the Good Old Stuff and More Good Old Stuff is publishing his reprints from the Pulps. He has one called Seven. That's 7 short stories or novellas, and then I think that's his other short story collection. I'm not sure if there's others, but I mean, dude, the guy wrote thousands of short stories for the pulps and even into the 1950s. So I wouldn't be surprised if he or his editors have a very difficult task of picking out the best one. So I'm willing to bet that his branded anthologies of his own short stories are just awesome.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading that. And I got some Westerns. I got Son of the Flying Y and Dallas. Both of those are by Will Jenkins. And do you remember a conversation we had? Maybe it was last year. I can't remember. But it was about the Walt Slade / Jackson Cole Western series.
Yeah. It's like a confusing thing.
It is. Those are written by an author named Leslie Scott. And so I picked up a great-looking paperback called Guntown, which is written under the pseudonym Jackson Cole. And I also got another Western called The Lonely Man by, I believe, a Florida author named Robert Turner. I think he was palling around with Gil Brewer and Talmadge Powell in Florida for a while. Yeah, I'm not familiar with him too much. I got an old Ed McBain 87th Precinct novel called Like, that I think it's a first printing. It looks great. But that was it for, I picked up a few things out of that table, but that's for the most part, that was it. And then I sort of worked the room from there. And there were, obviously tons and tons of pulp magazines. And there was a huge section of wall that was dedicated to nothing but Doc Savage. And my wife and I kind of journeyed over there and through the crowd, and we were looking at the Doc Savage's magazines. And I was thinking, well, it'd be kind of cool to buy one just to say I had it. And then I saw the sticker price. Take a guess.
I don't know, but pulps are so expensive. I mean, I don't want to steal your thunder by guessing too high. $40, $50, more or less.
$350.
Yeah, it's crazy, and it's just not worth it. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess for me, it's not worth it because, again, I want to read the stories inside these books and these pulps. And so the idea of buying something that precious that I can't just put in my back pocket and go to the neighborhood swimming pool to the beach to read, I don't want to have to handle my reading material like it's nitroglycerin.
Exactly. Yeah, needless to say, I was like a catfish in a car wash, just trying to just get away from that table. But I think it's ran by a guy named David Alexander, not the pulp author, not the Phoenix guy, but a third and wholly different David Alexander, which is a renowned collector and dealer. And he had just boxes and boxes of comics and magazines there. And he had a small handful of paperbacks. But when I saw a sticker price of like $50 on one of them, I scampered away. I was like, no, there's no way. But I did. I met, obviously there were some guys there that were up and coming, and I met one of them named George Moss, and he's an artist and he's a writer and illustrator for a sci-fi novel called The Chronicles of Anne and Lo. And he was a nice enough guy, and he had some great artwork, so he was kind enough to autograph a copy of his book for me, and I really enjoyed that. Now across the hall is really where I thought the good stuff was in terms of stuff that we like to talk about on the show. It was the, I guess maybe he had 2 or 3 tables. It was the Bold Venture Press section of that room. And
yeah.
And it was, of course, this is a publishing house. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a Florida publishing house owned by Audrey Parente and Rich Harvey. And I briefly chatted with Audrey, and man, she's a class act. She was just super kind. But most of my time was spent with Rich, and I found out that he lives in Florida, and he loves all the same stuff that we love, Tom. And I encourage everyone to check out boldventurepress.com and just look at their impressive catalog. We've had the opportunity to review some of their stuff on the blog, and I've talked about it on the show as well. And Rich and I talked about the Benedict and Brazos series, which we reviewed on maybe the last episode of the show and reviewed on the blog as well. Tom, I got a Western called Ghost Bullet Range by Johnston McCulley, who is also the author of a lot of the Zorro pulp stories. So I was able to pick up I picked up the Western, and then I got an omnibus called The Complete Pulp Adventures of Zorro, Volume 1. I grew up watching Zorro as a kid on the Disney Channel, and my dad is a huge Zorro fan, so I figure once I devour it, I'll just pass it on to him. I think Rich and Audrey have 4 or 5 volumes of these Zorro stories. I also picked up an omnibus simply titled Railroad Stories, and I think there's 3 different volumes of these stories, and I just randomly picked one. It appears that the author of these stories is a guy named John Johns. Are you familiar with any of these railroad stories or that author?
No, I saw that you got that, and I was curious about it. I mean, the pulps were so specific back then when they were like, you'd have like a railroad pulp or like a farmhand pulp where they would just have
right.
articles from like various very specific industries of like stories from that industry, and I think that the railroad stories probably come from that tradition.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how excited I'm going to be about Casey Jones and his locomotive, but I'm willing to give it a try. Hey, do you remember a novel that you reviewed last December called The Girl in the Trunk?
Bruce Cassidy, yeah. I reviewed 2 books by Bruce Cassidy. One I did not like, but I loved Girl in the Trunk. That was awesome.
Okay, I bought the reprint of Brass Shroud.
Okay, is that star his private eye, Cash Madigan?
I need to look. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, he's like an insurance investigator type of guy, and but yeah, no, he's a good writer. Bruce Cassidy is better than he needed to be. There was one book by him that I reviewed that I didn't like, but man, that Girl in the Trunk was awesome.
Good. Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it, and it's just a beautiful reprint. Boeckman Press, they really don't spare any change in terms of cover art and packaging. They really put a solid effort into that and make their reprints just look fantastic. And I was blown away by Rich's hospitality, Audrey, just a class act. And they gave me a little Paperback Warrior discount, a small discount on some of the books, and gave me a couple promo items to plug on the show as well. So I'm looking forward to reading and reviewing those. In fact, one of them that I'm going to talk about today is a short story collection called Strictly Poison and Other Stories by today's feature, an author named Charles Boeckman. So I'm going to be talking about that book later. I worked that room a little bit, and I saw there was a Lovecraft historian there with some books. There was a steampunk table with 2 authors that were dressed up to match the theme. I'm not really sure, what that was about. I don't do I don't do steampunk.
You ever go to a comic book convention?
Yeah, I've been to some, and they really, really do it up, don't they?
Yeah. Comic book and science fiction conventions, you get like the 350-pound women dressed like Wonder Woman and stuff like that. It's a subculture.
Well, there were no 350-pound women there, but there were these attractive women that were dressed up as the sort of like the pulp pinup types. So they had
age types.
Yeah. There was maybe 5 or 6 of them. And so they were kind of there doing their photos and things like that.
Smart move, bringing your wife to the convention.
She's great. I mean, she's never met a stranger, so she she walked around the room and she talked with everyone, and she plugged Paperback Warrior quite a bit. But hey, I've got sort of a little heartwarming story too. You ready? So walking through the room, I noticed that there was a young child there in the room, and this is a guy named Peter David Parente, which I believe is Audrey's grandson, and he has a book out. He's a new author, and he's an illustrator, and my wife and I had the pleasure of talking with him. His first book is called Tommy on Green Hills, and it's out right now. And again, this guy's 9 years old. He was asked to complete a school project, and he came up with his own children's book. And he wrote the book, he illustrated the interior pages. And Tommy on Green Hills is a story of 2 turkeys who decided to duck out before they were served as a Thanksgiving feast. And it's a beautiful little book. It's 26 pages as a trade paperback, or you can get a hardcover. Just what a great thing to see a young man pursuing a writing career at just such a young age. And I think he's going to do some really awesome things in life with his creative abilities. And, hey, if you're a men's action adventure enthusiast, I mean, Tommy on Green Hills is like a prison escape novel, right? 2 turkeys breaking out. Well, if you're looking for a fun book for child or grandchild, definitely check that one out. You can get it on Amazon. Again, it's called Tommy on Green Hills by Peter David Parente. That wraps up Pulp Adventure Con. Now, you mentioned you've been to one of the bigger Pulp Adventure cons, right? Or Pulp conventions, I should say, in Chicago.
Yeah, in 2017, I went to or may have been 2018, but I think I met you in 17. And so I had been there in late 17. So it was summertime. I went to the Windy City Pulp and Paper Convention in suburban Chicago. And it's a weekend convention. I think it was Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I went Friday, and it was really cool. It was I don't know how big your dealer's room was down there in Fort Lauderdale, but the dealer's room here was the size of a really big high school gymnasium. And so nice. like 4 rows of tables, Lots of used paper, mostly pulps, which just like comic book boxes, because everyone has them bagged and boarded. But a lot of paperback guys, a lot of the paperback reprint guys were there, like people like Will Murray, who writes all the old pulp adventure heroes right now, like the Shadow and the Spider. He had a table set up selling his like beautifully packaged hardcovers. You got to chat with him. You saw just a lot of the. A lot of the characters who do the reprints were also there. It was just, the dealer's room was really impressive. It was a little expensive, but you could kind of dicker with them, which I know you're not good at, but I like negotiating with them. Where if you could get like 6 books for then it would otherwise be $30. You could get them down to 20. And the last day of the convention, they didn't want to pack their stuff up in the car, so they were more than happy to really dicker with you then. But you ran the risk of if you saw a book you wanted, you ran the risk of not being able to get it. But there was also a separate room filled with like pulp art, like an art. It was like you felt like you were in an art gallery where they were selling like original illustrations of like Mac Bolan covers and stuff like that. And they were really expensive. I mean, it was like going into an art museum. And then at night, I didn't go to this. They had a lot of an auction, like a live auction where, people are basically unloading pulp, entire, like 50 issues of amazing stories or, detective magazines from back in the days, and kind of bundled together. And those went for hundreds and thousands of dollars. And
wow,
I had zero interest in that. But the special guest was that artist, Jim Steranko. You know him?
No.
He did a lot of covers of art. He was also a comic book guy. He was clearly, dude's probably in his 80s. He was wearing like a leather suit, like a business suit made of leather. He was clearly in his element, right? Because he's probably just a normal schlubby guy in his day-to-day life. But he goes there and he's like a celebrity. He's like the Beatles. And so that was neat. And then they had a room of like panels, like you'd see at Comic-Con, where you go and you sit down and there'd be like a panel of authors discussing this or that. And there was one panel that really interested me that I like dropped everything to get out there on Sunday morning, because it was Men's Adventure paperback panel. And I was like, oh man, it's going to be great. So the guy who was moderating it was Ron Fortier. He runs Airship 27, a kind of new pulp. I guess it's not reprints, but he's printing basically old pulp heroes in new stories by new authors for his imprint. And he actually has he's got a really good blog called pulpfictionreviews.blogspot.com, and I've enjoyed his reviews. So I talked to him for a long time, but the panel he had, it was him and 2 dudes. The first dude was kind of interesting because I had read his books. A guy named Michael A. Black. He wrote a bunch of executioner books toward the end, including one I really liked called Dragon Key, which is executioner number 435. Written in 2015. I mean, by that point, Mac Bolan, the executioner, there was published on the name of Don Pendleton, of course, but you could see that Michael A. Black was the author. Anyway, he was an interesting dude because he was a cop in suburban Chicago, who's retired, and I was an FBI agent in Chicago for 13 years, and so we were both in kind of Chicago law enforcement at the same time. So I got to chit chat with him a little bit. But the headliner of the panel was none other than Len Levinson, the author of the Rat Bastard series and 1,000 other kind of men's adventure books. And he was neat to talk to. I talked to him for a long time. The panel itself was depressing because I in my mind, I envisioned just like a packed room full of like dudes like me who are really into this stuff. Instead, it was like me and like 3 sleepy senior citizens with like oxygen tanks going into their tracheas and stuff.
Oh.
And so Ron Fortier, he introduces Michael A. Black and Len Levinson. Michael A. Black introduces himself about who he is, kind of where he comes from, holds up his Mac Bolan book, says what an honor it is to be on a panel with Len Levinson. He talks for maybe 2 minutes, and then he turns it over to Len Levinson to introduce himself, who then talks for 55 straight minutes.
Oh.
But it was interesting. I'm a huge Len Levinson fan, but Len was clearly not happy with the way that his career had turned out, right? Mm-hmm. He wanted to be Harold Robbins. He wanted to be a New York Times bestselling author who was kind of brilliant and lauded and beloved. And I think that he just felt that every step of the way was kind of a career and business misstep. And it was almost like he was in therapy, just kind of talking to me and the 3 octogenarians in the room. And so afterwards, I went and talked to Len for a long time, and we walked around the floor. And I was really trying to pep him up and to sort of convince him that, listen, although you aren't Harold Robbins or Stephen King or whatever you wanted to be when you were a young man, there are people out there, like hundreds of them, that I'm in Facebook groups with who love your work, who like live and die by your work, who read the Sargent series and just thought it like just changed their attitude about what war fiction could be. And who've just enjoyed your book. So, and there's nothing wrong. He owes nobody any apology for being a literary entertainer. And I was just trying to impress that upon him. And I mean, he's an older guy. He's probably in his 80s. And but I hope some of that sunk in with him, and he could eventually find like peace. I mean, we're still friends on Facebook with his body of work, and just because he's not living in some Beverly Hills mansion, it doesn't mean that his work doesn't matter to people. And there's really nothing to apologize for being an entertainer who chooses paperbacks as the medium. So. But, yeah, I'd like to go back to that convention, and I was thinking it might be fun. Listen, if I'm making the offer right now, if the organizers of the Windy City Pulp and Paper Convention want to fly Eric and I out there and put us up in a hotel for the weekend, we will do a panel there, and I promise we will double the number of people who are at the Men's Adventure panel. We're going to get at least 4 or 6 Paperback Warrior fans out there to watch us do a live show there. You up for that, Eric?
I second your confidence.
Yeah, it'll be the Paperback Warrior convention. We'll be like the Beatles when we get there.
Yeah, I like it. Well, hey man, I'm at 40 minutes. I got a feature and a review to do.
Oh, dude, I'm sorry. I'm eating up your podcast. Feel free to edit out all the boring parts. But hey, listener, I miss you, buddies, and I will be in touch with you. And Eric, I miss you too. And I will catch you guys on the flip side.
All right, man. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. All right, bye-bye. All right. So it was nice hearing from him. I'm glad that he's in good spirits, marching towards retirement, getting on with his career and his second stage in life as a detective and whatever else he's got going on. So good for him. But moving on along here, we got still a lot of stuff to cover. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to play some transition music, and we're going to go into today's feature. All right, as I mentioned earlier, today's feature is on author Charles Boeckman. I've only recently read Boeckman, and if I'm not mistaken, Tom may have mentioned his name on a prior episode. Charles Boeckman was born in San Antonio, Texas in 1920. In the 4th grade, Boeckman's class had a contest for the students to write a short story. And these stories would be reviewed, and whoever came up with the best and most interesting story would win a shiny quarter, which was probably like $10 today. So Boeckman wrote the winning story, thus his first opportunity to be paid for writing. And the author would later become a fan of pulp magazines. In 1945, Boeckman wrote Strictly Poison, which became his first published work. The story was featured in the October 1945 issue of Detective Tales, and from that point, Boeckman just honed his craft, and he just began selling a lot of stories. Now, it seems like with many of our features here on the show, we always seem to end up back in Florida, and I hate to beat a dead horse, for lack of a better term, but Florida was just fertile ground for mid-20th century crime noir authors, and Boeckman ends up in Florida for a few weeks, and he's invited to join a circle of author friends in St. Petersburg. And it's here that he's able to shop talk with the likes of Thomas Powell, Harry Whittington, authors like Gil Brewer, Day Keene. Imagine being a fly on the wall and just listening to these master craftsmen discuss writing and the industry and really just life. And I read that Boeckman hung out a little more with Thomas Powell, and even had the opportunity to join Thomas Powell and his wife for dinner on occasion. Now, a question I asked myself was, how did Boeckman, who really isn't on the same levels in terms of sales and notoriety as this particular circle of authors, how did he gain admission into this circle? I mean, we're talking about Day Keene, Gil Brewer, Harry Whittington, Thomas Powell. I mean, these are pretty heavy hitters. My guess is that the authors were vaguely aware of his short stories in the pulps, and they probably shared editors, but perhaps they knew Boeckman from his other career. You see, Boeckman wasn't just an author. Charles Boeckman taught himself to play the clarinet and saxophone from listening to records and studying, what do they call them? Fingering charts, I think is what they call them. He studied finger charts to really learn how to play these instruments. And so Boeckman delved into music theory and harmony, and he would later earn a spot in the Texas Lutheran College Band. And then after graduating high school, he started a career of playing in bands until the 1970s. And he stated in the Strictly Poison and Other Stories book, he states, "When I left home in the 1940s, I had $30 in my pocket, a used portable typewriter, a clarinet, and a saxophone that I'd bought at a pawn shop. The next morning, I gained a part-time job playing in bands." And folks, that's like 30 plus years of playing, writing, and recording music for bands and acts on the road, in the studio. But then in the 1970s, Boeckman formed his own Dixieland jazz band, which is basically New Orleans-style jazz. And he continued his musical career for the remainder of his life. And he has a star in the South Texas Music Walk of Fame. Now, based on that, my guess is that one of these Florida authors that were living on the Gulf Coast heard or saw Boeckman performing, and then maybe put two and two together that this is the same guy who's also writing stories for the Pulps. And perhaps he was invited based on the fact that he shared a same agent with these guys or same editors. And Boeckman was known to be friends with a lot of the Pulp editors. Or maybe these guys just simply loved and respected his short stories so much, which is totally understandable, but we'll never know. I'm going to quickly run through some of Boeckman's work and how you can get it, and then I'm going to talk about the Strictly Poison collection. Many of his Western stories are compiled into an omnibus called Stagecoach to Hell, which was published by Bold Venture Press in 2015, and it's available in ebook and trade paperback. There was also a 2014 collection of Boeckman's Westerns called Blazing Trails and Western Tales. There's a 2012 collection called Suspense, Suspicion, and Shockers, which features over 20 of the author's short stories pulled from digest magazines like Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine. His mystery suspense standalone novel, Pursued, with an exclamation point, was published in 2013. That may have been a reprint of a prior novel. I'm not really sure on that. His Western novel, When the Devil Came to Endless, was published in 1996, and I'm not sure if that's still in print. He had a Western novel titled Maverick Brand, published by Avalon in hardcover in 1961. In 2011, his novel The Last Jazz Band was printed. It's kind of a neat premise. It features a group of jazz musicians that all served in World War II. So they're military veterans, and they come back to Texas and they get caught up in this adventure involving an oil millionaire and a beautiful woman. So sort of like almost like a Rat Pack sort of adventure. Now, Boeckman wrote a number of nonfiction books on music, including Cool, Hot, and Blue, A History of Jazz for Young People. Along with writing his own stories and novels, Boeckman would later team up with his wife Patty to write 25 romance novels for the publisher Silhouette. Now, most of, if not all of these, are under Patty's name. And collectively, they sold over 2 million copies. Charles Boeckman died in 2015, but he left behind a legacy of great music and amazing stories. And that brings us full circle to Strictly Poison and Other Stories. It was published by Bold Venture Press in 2015 and features 24 of Boeckman's pulp stories. Listen to the pulp titles that these stories were pulled from: Detective Tales, Manhunt, Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, Pursuit Magazine, Famous Detective, Mobsters, FBI Detective, All Story Detective, Dime Detective, Justice Magazine, Malcolm's. The list goes on and on. I read the book, and man, I really, really enjoyed this collection. And I picked out just a few short stories that I thought were, remarkable, and I wanted to tell you about them here on the show. I've also got a review coming on the blog. I wrote my notes down for these stories and then used them to type up the review, which is going to post hopefully later this month or early June. But just for the sake of convenience and time, since we're kind of running late, I'm just going to read you my review of 3 stories that are included in the book. So I'm going to read these off to you and pull it up here. The first one's called Should a Tear Be Shed? It was originally published in 1954 by Malcolm's. It's a success story that focuses on the rise of a tap dancer named Lawrence Terrace Jr. He's a young man that suffered a brain injury when a truck ran him over. When a shyster named Jess Norvell catches Lawrence dancing by a bar jukebox, he puts together a scheme. First, he befriends Lawrence, then has an insurance policy placed on the young man for $50,000 with double indemnity for an accident. The next logical step is to make sure Lawrence dies in an accident. However, Jess's girlfriend Candy absolutely doesn't approve of the scheme, and she repeatedly tries to warn Lawrence that his friend is really just using him for financial gain. Like any good suspense story, Boeckman escalates the tension with multiple murder attempts and an explosive but not surprising finale. Man, I love this story, and I actually read it twice. The next one is I'll Make the Arrest, and it was one of Boeckman's most successful stories. It appeared in the very first issue of Manhunt, which is one of the most respected digest magazines. This was in January of 1953. The story was also adapted for the television show Celebrity Playhouse in 1956. It's an unusual story featuring a police detective named Mike O'Shane who's tracking down the murderer of a beautiful female celebrity. Now, O'Shane has a particular need to hunt down the killer, and despite the story's title, has no plans to make an arrest. I love how Boeckman, in first-person narrative, advises readers of O'Shane's motives. He writes, "I went down into the night, where it was dark and alone. I checked my gun because I was going to kill this boy who had strangled Pat." But the author throws in the obligatory curveball, and it was a twist I didn't see coming. This was so unique, and Boeckman delivered it perfectly with this really smooth prose. Next one here was, next and last one I should say, is Run, Cat, Run. And Boeckman injects his musical background into the story. It was originally published in Dime Mystery in 1949. The story's about a trumpet player named Johnny Nickel who's on the run from a killer. It's a suspenseful tale about the musicians that performed on a hit record called Jazz Date. Unfortunately, every musician on the record has mysteriously died except Johnny. As he frantically hops from town to town, Johnny makes ends meet by performing dive bars and juke joints, but his luck runs out in Texas when an armed woman barges into his motel room. Is she the killer, or is she running from a killer as well? The narrative reaches its climax on the shoreline of Corpus Christi Bay. But I've always enjoyed novels and stories set within the music industry, and Boeckman utilized this aspect so well. Run, Cat, Run was a real highlight for me. I wouldn't really even have the blog space or the time to talk about these fantastic stories. One is called Ybor City or Ybor City. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it. I've been there, but I don't know how to say the name. It's in Florida. It was featured in a 1953 Manhunt magazine, and it's a gritty revenge story set on the Gulf Coast. And there's also the wickedly humorous Strictly Poison story itself, which was in 1945 Detective Tales. As I mentioned earlier, that was his debut story. And even Paperback Warrior headquarters, Jacksonville, Florida, plays host to the murderous terror of a story called Class Reunion, which was published in 1973's Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine. So that's a wrap on Charles Boeckman. If you want to learn more about this author, then read his autobiography, Pulp Jazz, The Charles Boeckman Story, which is also published by Bold Venture Press. I want to thank Rich for really turning me on to this author and for suggesting the Strictly Poison book. And I also want to give credit to thepulp.net, where I've obtained some of the information for the feature. Now, moving on to this week's review, and it's called Mercy Island. And it was originally published as a hardcover in 1941. Later, in 1956, it was published with just fantastic artwork by Dell. This one is written by an author named Theodore Pratt, a name we probably should know more about on the show, or at least talk about on the show and the blog. He published over 30 novels, and he also used the pseudonym Timothy Brace. He's a short story guy as well, and he published in Manhunt, Guilty Detective Story, Coronet, Esquire, Blue Book. But today we're just going to focus on his novel, Mercy Island. At some point, maybe in the future, we'll do a feature on this guy. So pulling up Mercy Island, I've got my review here that I typed up for the blog. So again, just in the urgency of time, I'm going to read some of my notes here. This Mercy Island book was adapted into film the same year. So Republic Pictures released this in 1941 to cinema. And this one is obviously set in Florida, and it starts out with a group of passengers on this charter boat. And it introduces a guy named Ramsey, his wife Leslie, and an acquaintance named Foster. And they've hired this fishing charter. And in an act of just reckless abandonment, Ramsey, he kind of demands that the boat's captain take them way off course into a really choppy stretch of water in this rural portion of the Florida Keys. And obviously this is a fishing trip, and he wants to go where no one else is to land this big fish. But after hooking a big fish, Ramsey gets really stubborn and arrogant and just causes a lot of trouble. And he ends up causing the entire boat to run aground off the coast of this really isolated tropical island. And if you'll remember, maybe earlier this year, Tom had told us about a Bruno Fisher story called Hostesses in Hell, which was written under the name Russell Gray and published in the March-April issue of Terror Tales way back in 1939. In that story, Tom explained that a sailor and 7 women arrive on a tropical island to escape a devastating storm. Now, Bruno Fisher wrote his story like a complete horror tale, where Pratt, he really only bypasses the edges of terror with Mercy Island. But it's similar. These 5 characters venture onto the island, and they find this small house nestled in the jungle. And there's signs of this turtle that's been disemboweled and eaten, as well as indications that more than one person lives in the house. So there's this really kind of a gloomy sense, like an impending doom, that this is a mostly abandoned island, and there's a strange person living in this rather random house. As Ramsey, Leslie, and Foster travel further into the house, they start to realize that the captain and his mate share a secret about the island. So there's a mystery there. And I can't tell you really anything else about this book, because then I'll kind of ruin the storyline and the plot for you. But the characters themselves display a number of immoral sins, desire to arrogance. And there's a dispute that Ramsey has with Foster over Leslie, which is also kind of parallels Ramsey's own dispute that he has with this other person on the island. And the first half was great. I thought it was really effective. Tons of suspense, just a melting pot of, developing characters and how they interacted with each other. So it was a melting pot, and it was just really good. The second half was just utter boredom. These characters really just concentrate themselves on survival, hunting, fishing, sort of rationing out their supplies and water and things like that. So, it just really didn't do a whole lot for me on the second half. It just really fizzled out. I know there was a central story, and it eventually got to where it kind of developed into a finale, but just fizzled out for me. First half great, second half just not very good. So I found myself jumping through pages just to escape the boredom of this island. So anyway, started out great, ended not so well. So you can sort of take your chances on it. If you like, tropical island survival sort of stories, maybe you'll like it. There's probably better Theodore Pratt novels than this one, and heck, you may even be better served just watching the movie instead of reading this book. Just read it at your own risk. But anyway, that was Mercy Island by Theodore Pratt, and that's going to bring me to an end. I've got almost an hour that I've given you guys, so that's great. I hope you've enjoyed mostly my solo show, and I hope to be back here in a couple weeks with another solo show, and hopefully Tom maybe will call in, or we can call him. Follow us on paperbackwarrior.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And follow our new reviews on the blog, typically Monday through Friday, 6 a.m., with repeated archive reviews on the weekends. Again, this is Eric with Paperback Warrior, and have a great week. Bye-bye now.